I remember the heat before anything else. I was crawling across the sand, my uniform half melted to my skin, the Humvee behind me belching black smoke into the desert sky. My right hand was still wrapped around a rifle that wouldn't fire. The polymer grip fused to my glove. They told me later that he screamed my name before the flames took him. I didn't hear it. I was already outside, dragging myself forward on elbows slick with blood and grit, too dazed to realize my left boot was gone and my leg with it. They called me a hero. They said I saved 3 men and neutralized the threat. But I only remember looking back and seeing the turret engulfed, knowing Specialist Jason Cole was still up there. No medals ever weighed as much as his silence. My name is Sergeant Maya Cross, a former Army combat engineer. I led Convoy Bravo out of Kandahar 7 years ago when the mission fell apart. A wrong turn, a faulty GPS read, and a roadside blast that changed everything in under 30 seconds. I didn't die in that fire. Jason did. And I've been running from it ever since. People love stories about heroes rising from the ashes. What they don't talk about is how those ashes cling to you, bury themselves under your nails, behind your eyes, in every quiet moment. Survival sounds noble until you realize what you had to survive instead of who you couldn't save. I quit the Army 6 months after the blast. Couldn't sit through another ceremony. Couldn't answer another, "How did you do it?" without wanting to scream that I didn't do anything. I just didn't die. That's all. But war doesn't let go that easily, especially when you walk away with questions no one wants to answer. And the day I stepped back onto a military base for the first time in 7 years, I felt the fire stirring again. Not outside this time. Inside. The air at Fort Wexler was sharp and dry, thick with the scent of diesel and sun-scorched asphalt. It was a training ground for the Army's newest mechanized infantry units. Everything about the place felt coiled tight, like a fuse waiting for a spark. I walked into the orientation hall at exactly 0800. My boots were steady. My uniform, pressed for the first time in years, felt strange on my skin. I wasn't here as a soldier anymore. I was here as a civilian systems instructor. 12 men in their 20s turned at once. Fresh cuts, clean boots, the kind of confidence that hadn't been tested yet. A few of them exchanged smirks like they were in on a joke I hadn't heard. One trainee, a kid named Torres, leaned back in his chair, legs kicked out. He scanned me up and down. I wasn't wearing a rank patch anymore, just a generic instructor's polo. To him, I was just a woman wandering into the wrong room. "Ma'am," he said, drawing it out just enough to mock. "The admin desk is that way. Or maybe the PX. We're waiting for the tactical instructor." The others laughed, not loud, but just enough to echo. I didn't flinch. I placed my tablet on the front table. Years in uniform had taught me that silence, when held right, could cut sharper than rank. He wasn't done. "Real soldiers only," he added under his breath, loud enough for his buddies to catch. "Don't need civilians telling us how to drive." It hit the others like a spark. A few looked down. One chuckled. The kind of moment that hangs in the air, begging for someone to back down. Then the door behind me opened. Everyone stood instinctively, boots slamming the floor. General Thomas Merrick stepped in, silver stars on his chest, posture carved from granite. He was the base commander, a man I had served under in the sandbox years ago. His eyes scanned the room. Then they landed on me. He came to a stop. He didn't offer a handshake. He raised his hand and saluted sharply. "Good to have you back, Bravo 1. The room froze. Torres's face went pale. Chairs creaked as bodies shifted. No one breathed. That nickname, Bravo 1, hadn't been spoken out loud in years. It was the call sign of the NCO who dragged 3 men out of a burning convoy in Kandahar. I returned the salute, jaw tight. "Sir." He nodded once, then turned to the others. His voice was low, dangerous. "You are standing in the presence of a combat-tested operator who has bled more for this country than this entire room combined. I suggest you remember that the next time you open your mouths." The silence that followed was different, not awkward, reverent. It was the sound of a room recalibrating itself as they realized what gravity felt like. I took my seat at the instructor's desk. No one looked directly at me now. The weight of that call sign sat heavily across my shoulders. They didn't know what Bravo 1 had cost. It happened just outside Kandahar, on a mission that was supposed to be routine. The convoy was running the new EchoNav threat detection system. It was supposed to be the future of warfare, a HUD that highlighted IED heat signatures and mapped safe routes in real time. EchoNav had glitched twice that week. Ghost signals, false positives. But we were told the patch would hold. I remember Jason tapping the screen, frowning. "It's lagging again, Sarge. The refresh rate is dropping." "Reboot it," I said. "We move in 5. We hit the ridgeline too late. A sandstorm curled up behind us, comms fuzzed with static. Then, EchoNav flashed green. Route clear. It lied. The convoy split on the bad data. Our Humvee veered right, trusting the system. 1 second, we were rolling steady. Next, the ground erupted. It wasn't just a mine. It was a daisy chain. The blast lifted the vehicle, flipped it on its side. Fire caught before the metal hit the dirt. I blacked out for a breath. When I came to, everything was red and screaming. I crawled through broken glass, out through the wreckage. I saw Jason still in the turret, pinned by the twisted roll cage. The flames were crawling up around him. He was looking at the EchoNav screen. It was still flashing green. Route clear. "Get out!" I screamed. He looked at me. He didn't look scared. He looked resigned. Then the fuel line went. I survived. He didn't. A week later, the official report came out. Driver error, failure to adhere to visual protocols. They blamed Jason. They said he missed the visual markers. They cleared the EchoNav system of any fault. I knew it was a lie. But I was in a hospital bed, hopped up on morphine, and by the time I could fight it, the investigation was closed. 7 years later, I was standing in a simulator room at Fort Wexler. I was watching Torres run a convoy simulation in the new Stryker virtual trainer. "Coming up on the choke point," Torres said into his headset. "EchoNav reads clear. Pushing through." I watched the telemetry monitors. My stomach tightened. The simulation was running the EchoNav 2 software, the upgraded version. On the admin screen, I saw a spike in the heat signature data, a massive IED cluster on the left side of the road. But on Torres's screen, green light, route clear. "Stop!" I shouted. "Torres, hard brake." Torres hesitated. "System says green, ma'am." "Trust your eyes, not the screen," I yelled. He didn't listen. He accelerated. Boom! The simulator screens went red. Critical failure. Casualties, 4. The simulator pod shook and went dark. Torres pulled off his headset, looking shaken. "What happened? The screen said it was clear." I stared at the monitor. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't a glitch. It was the same error code I saw 7 years ago. Error 404, sensor latency. I looked at the software build logs. The update had been authorized 3 weeks ago. The approving officer's name was at the bottom of the digital certificate. Colonel Benjamin Whitman. My pulse ticked loudly in my ears. Whitman. He had been a major back in Kandahar. He was the tech officer in charge of the EchoNav rollout. He was the one who investigated Jason's crash. He was the one who signed the report blaming driver error. Now he was a colonel, and he was in charge of the entire EchoNav program. History wasn't just repeating itself, it was a loop. That night, I didn't go back to my quarters. I went to the server room. I had an access key from General Merrick. I wasn't supposed to be in the deep archives, but I didn't care. I needed to see the code. I met Ellie, a junior analyst I had befriended. She was young, brilliant, and hated the bureaucracy as much as I did. "This is risky, Maya," Ellie whispered, typing furiously on her terminal. "If Whitman finds out we're digging in the kernel logs, he'll court-martial us." "He killed my friend, Ellie," I said. "And he's going to kill those kids in the simulator if they deploy with this software." Ellie hit enter. "I'm in," pulling the crash report from Torres's simulation. We looked at the data. "That's weird," Ellie said. "Look at the error log." I leaned in. The log read sim crash event log, but the content? User input error, throttle applied during caution state. "It says Torres messed up," Ellie said. "But we saw it. The system gave him a green light." "Dig deeper," I said. "Look at the raw telemetry, before the report was generated." Ellie ran a script. She bypassed the user interface and pulled the raw binary data from the sensor feed. There it was. The raw data showed the sensors did detect the IED. They sent a warning signal to the main processor. But then, a subroutine kicked in. Patch override v4.x. This script intercepted the warning signal, suppressed it, and forced the display to show green. Then, after the crash, the script rewrote the event log to blame the driver's throttle input. "It's a cover-up patch," I whispered. My hands were shaking. "It's designed to hide system lag. If the processor gets overloaded, instead of shutting down and showing an error, it just fakes it. It tells the driver everything is fine, so the system looks responsive. And then it blames the driver for the wreck," Ellie realized, looking horrified. "Maya, this is murder." "I need to prove it," I said. "I need to prove this is the same code from 7 years ago." I reached into my bag. I pulled out a small, battered hard drive. "What is that?" Ellie asked. "The black box data from Jason's Humvee," I said. "I stole it from the wreckage before the MPs arrived. I've never been able to decrypt it." Ellie plugged it in. "The encryption is old. I can crack this in 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, we had the side-by-side comparison. On the left, Jason's crash data from Kandahar. On the right, Torres's crash data from the simulator. They were identical. The same patch override script. The same suppression of the warning. The same rewriting of the log to say driver error. Whitman hadn't fixed the system. He had patched the evidence. He had been selling the Army a broken compass for 7 years, protecting his contract by framing dead soldiers for his failures. I stared at the screen. I didn't feel the grief anymore. I felt the fire. The next morning, I requested a meeting with the Defense Review Board. I didn't tell them what it was about. I just used my Bravo 1 status to pull a favor. The conference room was cold, lined with flags. At the head of the table sat General Merrick and 2 civilian oversight officials. And sitting across from them, looking bored and annoyed, was Colonel Benjamin Whitman. He looked older than I remembered, heavier, but he still had that arrogant tilt to his chin. When I walked in, Whitman scoffed. "Sergeant Cross, I heard you were back, teaching the kids how to drive? I hope you're teaching them better than your last driver." He smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. He was baiting me. I didn't take the bait. I placed a heavy, ruggedized laptop on the table. "General Merrick," I said, I am accusing Colonel Whitman of gross negligence, data falsification, and involuntary manslaughter regarding the death of Specialist Jason Cole and the near-fatal failures in the current training cycle. Whitman laughed. This is ridiculous. She's suffering from PTSD, General. She's looking for someone to blame for her own team's incompetence. I have the logs, I said. I signaled Ellie, who was standing by the projector. The screen lit up. It showed the code. Patch override V4X. This is a subroutine embedded in the EchoNav kernel, I explained. It suppresses sensor warnings when the processor overheats. It forces a green light, even when threats are detected. Whitman sat up straighter. That is a proprietary stabilization algorithm. You don't understand the software. I understand that it rewrites the crash logs, I said. I put the side-by-side comparison on the screen. Jason's crash versus Torres's crash. 7 years ago, you blamed Jason Cole. You said he missed a visual marker, but the raw data proves his screen said clear. Your system lied to him, Colonel, and then you wrote a script to frame him for his own death. The room was silent. General Merrick looked at the data, his brow furrowed. These are just numbers, Whitman argued, sweating slightly now. Simulations have glitches, and that old data? Probably corrupted by the fire. You have no proof the hardware is actually failing. He leaned forward. The EchoNav 2 is battle-ready. It passed every stress test. Did it? I asked. Or did it pass the tests because your patch hid the failures? It works, Whitman shouted, losing his cool. It is the most advanced system in the world? Then prove it, I said. I walked to the door and opened it. 2 MPs wheeled in a cart. On it was an actual EchoNav 2 processing unit, hooked up to a generator and a sensor array. Whitman went pale. What is this? He demanded. This is the unit from the simulator, I said. We're going to run a stress test, right here, right now. You can't do that, Whitman said, standing up. It's not calibrated for this room. It's calibrated for war, isn't it? General Merrick asked, his voice low. Sit down, Colonel. I walked over to the laptop controlling the unit. The patch hides the failure when the system reaches 95% thermal load, I said. So, I'm going to push the data throughput to 100%. I typed the command. The cooling fans on the EchoNav unit spun up. They whined loudly in the quiet room. On the big screen, the status bar showed System status, green, operating normal. See? Whitman said, forcing a smile. Green. It's handling the load. Wait for it, I said. I cranked the input. I flooded the system with terabytes of dummy terrain data. The fans screamed. The unit started to vibrate on the cart. You could smell the ozone, the smell of burning silicon. On the screen, system status, green. It's melting, General Merrick observed. Why does it still say green? Because the patch is lying, I said. Smoke started to curl out of the vents of the unit. Whitman stood up. Turn it off. You'll destroy the prototype. If it works, it should shut itself down, I yelled over the noise of the fans. A working system triggers a safety cutoff. Why isn't it cutting off, Colonel? Whitman didn't answer. He stared at the smoking machine. System status, green, crack. A capacitor inside the unit exploded. A spark shot out of the vent. The smoke turned black. The unit caught fire. Actual flames licked up the side of the casing, and on the screen, shining bright and clear in the smoke-filled room, root clear, system green, I cut the power. The fans died. The fire alarm in the hallway started to blare. I pointed at the burning machine. That is what Jason saw, I said, my voice shaking with rage. He was burning to death, and your screen was telling him everything was fine. Whitman slumped into his chair. He couldn't speak. The smoke hung in the air, a physical manifestation of his lie. General Merrick stood up. He walked over to the smoking unit, then turned to Whitman. "MPs," Merrick said. The two military police officers stepped forward. "Take Colonel Whitman into custody," Merrick ordered. "Charges are fraud, dereliction of duty, and manslaughter." Whitman looked up, his eyes hollow. "I was just trying to save the contract. We needed the funding." "You traded lives for a budget line," I said. As they handcuffed him, Whitman looked at me. "You're just a mechanic," he sneered weakly. "You ruined the program." "No," I said. "I fixed it." 3 weeks after the hearing, Colonel Whitman's name was stripped from every system he ever touched. His office was cleared out. He was facing a court-martial that would put him in Leavenworth for 20 years. The EchoNav program was grounded immediately. They offered me a promotion, a job at the Pentagon, a seat on the Oversight Committee in D.C. with a nice salary and a view of the Potomac. I turned it down. Titles don't save lives. Systems do. And systems need people who are willing to get their hands dirty to check them. I stayed at Fort Wexler. I took over the Safety and Compliance Division. I converted an empty hangar into an independent testing lab. We called it the Crossfire Protocol. Every piece of tech that entered the base, every sensor, every radio, every GPS had to go through us. We ran them until they broke. We stripped the code. We hunted for the patches and the lies. Every manual we printed opened with the same line in bold: truth before tradition. One night, late, I sat in the cockpit of the simulator. The hangar was quiet. The smell of ozone and oil was comforting now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Jason's dog tag. The edges were still blackened from the fire 7 years ago. I bolted it to the dashboard of the simulator, right next to the new master warning light. I used to think the fire only destroyed, that it came to take. But now I saw it differently. Fire burns away the rot. It burns away the lies. And if you stand in it long enough and you don't run, it forges you into something unbreakable. I tapped the dog tag. "We got him, Jace," I whispered. The warning light blinked once. A steady, honest amber. System ready. I closed my eyes and finally, after 7 years, the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like peace.